Welcome to another video from ExplainingComputers.com. This time we're going to look at the latest version of the Ubuntu Linux distro. As in many of my videos here, I'm going to take the perspective of a Windows user who may be thinking of migrating to Linux. And so I'm going to show you how to install Ubuntu 20.04, including running it from an external SSD, and then I'll move on to look at the operating system's features and operation. Well, it's now April the 23rd, 2020, and I'm here on the Ubuntu website at ubuntu.com, and Ubuntu 20.04 has just been released. Here it is on this page. So I'm going to leap in and grab the image as soon as I can. There it is there. We'll get the image there and save it onto our computer. And while that starts, it's about a 2.5 gigabyte download. It's worth pointing out, as you can see on the screen here, this is 64-bit and 64-bit only. There is not a 32-bit version of Ubuntu 20.04. And in case you're wondering, Ubuntu is a South African word that captures the spirit of humanity and sharing, with the pronunciation being Ubuntu. As you can probably see on the screen, it's labelled here an LTS release. LTS stands for long-term support and means that Ubuntu 20.04 has free security and maintenance upgrades until April 2025. And just in case you're wondering, the system requirements are a dual-core 2 GHz processor or better and at least 2 GB of RAM. So let's now let the download complete. And here we are, the download has come to an end. There we are, that's fantastic. And we now need to take the file we've just downloaded and to write it to a USB drive, which we can use to either install or try out Ubuntu. And the drive I'm going to use is this tiny Corsair Vega, which is plugged into my laptop. And we're going to write the image to it using Balena Etcher, which I've got running here. So I just need to select the image we just downloaded, which is sitting there. There it is. And there we are. And I'll check we've got the right drive selected, only one available, that's fine. And we'll now click on Flash to write the image to our USB drive. And there we are, we've finished, which is pretty good. We'll close down Etcher, and we now need to reboot the computer. Right. With the USB drive still in place, my laptop is starting up again, and I've pressed the Escape key to access a boot menu. As you can see, here I can select to boot from the USB drive rather than the Windows Boot Manager. Note that different computers use a different key to access their boot menu, with common options including Escape, Delete, F2, F7 or F12. But here I can now press Enter to boot from the USB drive. And at the next menu we can select to try Ubuntu without installing, which would happen after a few seconds by default. As you can see, a disk check will take place, after which Ubuntu will boot. And here we are, we've arrived. And as you can see, we have two options: to install Ubuntu or to just try it out. And if you click on try it out, you can actually try it out. That's probably what you guessed, it's running from the USB drive. This might be what you want to do. And as you can see, you've got a working operating system to play with as you wish. And as an aside, Ubuntu 20.04 has a codename Focal Fossa, where a focal means a point of attention, and fossa is this carnivorous predatory cat sitting on the top of the default desktop. Anyway, what I want to do is to do an install, but I don't want to replace Windows on this laptop, so what I'm going to do is to install Ubuntu on an external SSD, which I can plug in as required. And any external SSD which connects via a USB 3 interface should work well, but here I'm going to use a 120 GB Kingston A400, which is a low-cost drive, at least here in the UK. And I'm going to connect it via this SATA to USB adapter, which will attach to the drive like this, and then plug in to my laptop. With the drive plugged in, we'll now run up the installer, where initially I'll set my language and also my keyboard layout and connect to the internet. On the next screen, we'll then go for a normal installation, but we'll make sure we've ticked the options to download updates if any are available, and also to install third-party software, including hardware drivers and media codecs. Next, if you've plugged in an SSD which has already been formatted, you'll be asked if you wish to unmount it, to which the answer is yes. On this next screen, it's been detected that Windows is already present on this computer, and one option is therefore to install Ubuntu alongside Windows in a dual boot configuration, so that each time you start up your machine, you'll get a menu and you can choose if you want to boot into Windows or Ubuntu. And this can work, but you can also get problems, particularly following Windows updates, so this is not what I'm going to do, and as I've said already, I want to install Ubuntu onto an external SSD I can plug in when required. The second option here is actually an option which is labelled to erase disk and install Ubuntu, and so on most occasions this would be used to actually get rid of Windows and to replace it with Ubuntu. But if we're careful, we can use this option to actually achieve what I want to do here, to install Ubuntu onto an external SSD. So I'm going to click on option, and being very careful, I'm going to click continue just once. Now, in the subsequent screen, the really important thing is to change the drive on which Ubuntu is going to be installed, because here by default it's picked up the boot drive, the system drive on this computer, which here is the 512GB SSD on my laptop, which I do not want to touch. But it's also picked up the Kingston SSD we've just plugged in, the 120GB Kingston SSD, so that's what we need to pick here for our install. And I cannot stress enough how important it is to get this selection right, because if you get it wrong, you will delete Windows and everything else from your computer. So please be very careful here. And as a general point, if you're doing any kind of install, make sure you've got a full backup of everything on your computer, just in case things go wrong. But here I'm certain I picked the external SSD and not my internal Windows drive, and so I'll click on Install Now. Next, Ubuntu of course checks if I'm really certain. I'll go yes, I'm certain, and continue. And then we get some basic operating system stuff. We'll make sure my location is correct, which it is, and then I have to set up an account on this computer. And then with that information in, I can click on continue, and the Fossa cat will now focus its attention on the Ubuntu install. And there we are, the install is complete, and we now need to click on Restart Now. And after a second we'll see this message to remove our installation media, which clearly I'm going to do. And what should now have occurred is we've installed Ubuntu on the external SSD with Windows untouched on our computer's system drive. And to check this, I'm going to remove the external SSD, and then I'll try booting up again, and this may well work. But if it doesn't, reboot and enter your computer's BIOS, probably by pressing the Escape, Delete or F2 key on Power Up, and then in the BIOS set the first boot option to Windows Boot Manager, as the install sometimes changes this without being asked, which is indeed exactly what's happened here. We need to have Windows Boot Manager at the top of the list. But with that changed back again, we can now save and exit, and the computer should now boot into Windows in the normal fashion. And I'm always pleased to see this happening when I've been installing an operating system on an external drive. This said, if we now plug in our external drive, let's plug in Ubuntu like that, I should now be able to restart the machine. And during the restart, I'll press the key to enter the boot menu, where here I'm going to select Ubuntu, which will cause the computer to boot into Ubuntu 20.04. Right, installation sorted, we can now log in, and here we are in our new Ubuntu installation. And as you can see, we're asked various questions. Do we want to connect online accounts? I will skip that. Do we want to set up something called Live Patch, which can keep the system secure, but it does require you to set up an Ubuntu One account, and so it's something I'm personally going to skip. But I'm happy at my next step to provide information to Canonical about Ubuntu has problems. That seems perfectly reasonable, and I'm going to skip location-based services. And oh look, we're all ready to go. And as we've seen already, Ubuntu 20.04 has a very distinctive look and feel that I find rather reassuring. However, one of the first things we're going to do is to go up to the top here and go up to Settings, which we can access up here. There we are. And I'm going to change the scaling of the screen by going into Screen Display, and we're going to turn on Fractional Scaling, which is new to Ubuntu 20.04. And I'm going to select 150% scaling and apply that. And hopefully in a second, if we keep those changes, yes, things are a bit easier now to see on the screen. Although, do note my screen will look slightly different to a screen you might be using because I've got a recorder connected in to record this video. This said, although fractional scaling is a very, very welcome addition here, we still don't have in Ubuntu complete element control of things like individual fonts in the interface, which we do have in a Linux distro like, for example, Linux Mint. And it is possible to install extensions to the GNOME desktop used in Ubuntu to add this sort of functionality, but it is a pity it's not there by default in a new version. This said, there are some very nice appearance settings here, which we look under Appearance. Not least, we've got 3 sets of colours we can use now. We've got the standard theme, we've got the light theme, it looks like that. We've also got the dark theme, which looks very wacky indeed. I do like the dark theme. And I think we'll keep that for the remainder of this video. We've also got controls here to hide the dock if we wish, to change the icon size on the dock, which you'll see happening on the side of the screen. Over there, I think we'll leave it where it is, and we can change the position of the dock if we want to. And if you're wondering, the dock refers to the bar on the far left of the screen that contains icons for the most popular applications, which include, for example, Firefox web browser, which we can launch there. Hopefully it'll come up. There we are, we've got the Firefox web browser. We've also got down here the Thunderbird email client. We've got a file manager, which looks rather funky in the new dark theme. And also on the dock here, we've got the Rhythmbox music player. We've got a link to LibreOffice Writer, and we've got a link to the Ubuntu software installer, which we'll have a look at later in the video. Oh, and also down here, we've got a fantastic help system, which we can access like that. Also on the dock at the moment, we have got settings, and this is because active applications will appear in the dock. And hopefully, as you can see, we have red dots here against all active applications. And if we go up to activities on the panel on the far left, we can click on activities and it'll show us everything currently running. And we could click on something here to get to it, which is rather nice. And activities can also be selected by pressing the Windows key on the keyboard, which Ubuntu calls the super key. And we can also, if we wish, move between applications using Alt and Tab, as we have done previously in Windows. Finally, at the very bottom of the dock here, we have a Show Applications icon, which brings up all applications on the system. And we can scroll up and down these if we wish, or we can navigate them using the little controls for the panes on the side there. Or we can navigate using search. So for example, I could type in, say, Libre there to search for all the parts of a LibreOffice and maybe launch the LibreOffice Calc spreadsheet. With this open, I can point out that all applications have 2 types of menus. They have menus along the top, as you would expect, as we see normally in programs and various operating systems. But there's also here a menu on the panel. And this, as you can see, allows you to do things like creating a new document or a new tab, depending on the application being used. And once you've done that, you can then move between those particular documents using the top menu. Finally, before I forget to tell you, there is a very important control on the top left, on the drop-down we've seen previously, which is to power off or log out. You must make sure you always know how to get out of a system. So I think now what I'm going to do is to give Ubuntu a rest by closing down all applications, and then we will shut down the system, and I will go and have a cup of tea. I'm often asked how easy it is to install a printer in Linux, and this will depend on your particular model and whether its manufacturer provides Linux drivers. This said, Ubuntu 20.04 supports a great many printers out of the box. To prove the point, I thought I'd connect my laser printer, which is a Kyocera FS1300D. I thought we'd connect it up and see if it is recognised plug and play. So I'll connect it into my laptop like that, and then we'll turn the printer on. And yes, it's appeared on the screen. It says configuring printer. That's pretty good news, isn't it? And there we are. The printer has been added. And if we click on it there, we'll hopefully see in printers, yes, the printer has been set up on the system. And we'll test it out, because always you need to do a test. I've got Firefox running here. Let's print out sort of this page. Let's go to this and print, and I'll just set this up. And we'll try a print. And here we are, it's coming out, and it looks like it's doing the duplex thing. I particularly want to try printing double-sided. Yes, that seems to have worked. That's rather impressive. And this, of course, doesn't mean the printer you have will necessarily work, but I have at least demonstrated Ubuntu 20.04 plug and play. Right. Having installed a printer, I thought we should install some applications, which is nice and straightforward using the Ubuntu software installer, this nice orange icon. And this gives us a graphical interface to install applications with some nice editor's picks, including the Kdenlive video editor. And if I show you some of the categories, for example, productivity, we can click on there and the various things will come up. There they are, including the Chromium browser. I might install that later on. And we could look, for example, in, I don't know, I like art and design, let's look at that. And the various apps will come up here, including GIMP, Photoshop Alternative, and the Inkscape vector-based editor, which I'll bring up there. So what I'm now going to do is to install Inkscape, and I'll probably also install a few other applications. Just have to put my password in here. And as you can see, very straightforward process. So I'll get on with my installs and come back to you again in a second. And here I am back again with the ever-watching Fossa cat, and I've got various applications now installed and running, including Inkscape, where I pulled in an image of Mr. Scissors, initially created in Adobe Illustrator. It works fine here in Inkscape. We could change the colour of his blades, couldn't we? Oh dear, we wouldn't like that. It's like changing the colour of C-3PO's arms or legs in Star Wars. It's always never very popular. Let's change that back again. There we are. And I've also got running here GIMP, the Photoshop clone, which is running there. And if you're wondering how do you make things full screen, F11 seems to work in most applications to take you up to full screen. And then the final thing I've got running here is a Kdenlive. I've got all of this running on my 8GB laptop, running perfectly happily. And Kdenlive here has got the edit in from my recent Raspberry Pi Week video. I'll press play. You won't be able to hear me because I haven't got audio connected to recording, which is probably a great relief. But there we are. We've had a look at various bits of software all running perfectly happily here in Ubuntu 20.04. For long-term Windows users, migrating to Linux can be somewhat daunting. This said, if you choose a modern distro like Ubuntu 20.04, it is something that can be fairly straightforward. Granted, available software remains a constraint, with, for example, LibreOffice, as I'm running here, not being entirely compatible with Microsoft Office. This said, there are potential solutions, such as running Microsoft Office web apps, as you can see here, in a browser, which gives you an online version of a Word, PowerPoint and Excel running on a Linux system. And if you want to know more about this, I've got a video called Linux Tips for MS Office Users, in which I provide a lot more information for those who rely on Office and want to migrate to Linux. Such issues aside, the best way to embrace Ubuntu, or indeed any new or alternative operating system, is to use it intensively for a long period of time. And in this context, it's worth noting that here we have pre-installed a fantastic version of Solitaire. And if Solitaire is not a great way to do something intensively on a computer for a long period of time, I don't know what is. So I'm now going to spend some intense time rearranging virtual playing cards, and I'll hand over to the studio version of myself to bring this video to a close. Ubuntu 20.04 is a very stylish, a very professional and a very reliable operating system. Personally, I'm still going to stick with Linux Mint as my go-to, as my daily driver Linux distro, in part because of the control you've got of fonts and other interface elements in Linux Mint without having to install extensions. This said, were it not for Ubuntu, we wouldn't have Linux Mint, and there is no doubt whatsoever, if you're a Windows user who's thinking of migrating to Linux, then Ubuntu 20.04 is a very safe bet. But now that's it for another video. If you've enjoyed what you've seen here, please press that like button. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe, and I hope to talk to you again very soon.